You are standing on the banks of the Mississippi River on the morning of November 11th, 1940. It is 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 Celsius. You've rolled up your shirt sleeves. The sun feels generous on your skin, almost indecent for mid-November in Minnesota. Armistice Day, a Monday off work. The kind of gift that autumn rarely gives. Warm enough to forget that winter is coming, warm enough to believe that maybe this year will be different. You can hear the water lapping gently against wooden docks, the smell of river mud, rich and ancient. Somewhere upstream, a radio plays Glenn Miller through an open cabin window. The world feels suspended in amber light. But the geese know something you don't. They've been moving south for 3 days now, in formations so dense they cast shadows like clouds, thousands of them, tens of thousands. The sound of their wings is like distant machinery, like the world itself is migrating. The ducks too, mallards, canvasbacks, bluebills, descending onto the river in numbers that old hunters have never seen, not in 20 years, not in their lifetimes. You think this is luck. You think the birds have come for you. You don't yet understand that they're running from something, that you're standing in the path of what they're fleeing, that by nightfall, you'll be running too. Only you won't have wings, and there will be nowhere left to run. 1940 was the year America exhaled. The Depression, that decade-long stranglehold, was finally loosening its grip. Factories were humming again. Men had paychecks. The breadlines were shorter. Yes, there was war in Europe. Hitler had taken France that summer. The Blitz was pounding London into rubble. But that was an ocean away. America was still at peace, still innocent, still convinced that geography could protect it from history. In the upper Midwest, life had found its rhythm again. Towns like Winona, Minnesota, and La Crosse, Wisconsin, nestled along the Mississippi, were breathing easier. The river towns, the duck-hunting capitals of America. And on this particular Armistice Day, this day meant to commemorate the end of one war, the hunting was biblical. The ducks had been pouring down the Mississippi flyway for 72 hours, a migration unlike anything in recorded memory. The skies were black with them. They filled the river like a living carpet, so dense in places that the water itself seemed to disappear beneath their bodies. For the hunters, this was providence, divine compensation for 10 hard years. Men loaded their boats before dawn, some with their sons, some with brothers, some alone. They packed thermoses of coffee, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, boxes of shells. They wore light jackets. Why wouldn't they? It was 60 degrees. 300 men, perhaps more, pushed off from docks and riverbanks that morning along a 200-mile stretch of the Mississippi. They motored out into the channel, into the sloughs and backwaters, following the ducks into the maze of islands and sandbars that make the upper Mississippi a hunter's paradise. What they didn't know, what the Weather Bureau in Chicago knew but couldn't communicate, not fast enough, not to men already on the water, was that the ducks weren't migrating. They were evacuating. A mass of Arctic air, born in the frozen wastes of Saskatchewan, had been building for a week. On the morning of November 11th, it broke south like a dam bursting, and the ducks, with their ancient evolutionary wisdom, their barometric sensitivity, had felt it coming. They had fled ahead of it, staging on the Mississippi because it was the last open water before the cold arrived and turned everything to stone. The hunters thought they were predators. They were bait. The wind shifts. It's subtle at first, a change in direction. Southwest to northwest. The air develops a texture, a weight. The temperature is still 58 degrees, still comfortable, but something indefinable has changed. The river, which had been calm, begins to darken. Small waves appear, slapping against aluminum hulls with a tinny insistence. Some hunters notice, most don't. They're focused on the sky, on the birds still trading back and forth in nervous formations. 48 degrees, 14 Fahrenheit degrees in 90 minutes. The wind is no longer a breeze. It's a presence, sustained at 25 miles per hour, gusting to 40. Coming straight out of the northwest now, unimpeded across 2,000 miles of prairie, the temperature is dropping so fast you can feel it happening, like someone is draining heat from the air in real time. The light changes. The sun, which had been so generous that morning, disappears behind a flat ceiling of cloud, the color of old iron. The river turns the color of lead. Men begin buttoning their jackets, the inadequate fall jackets they'd chosen that morning in the warmth of their kitchens, 37 degrees. Rain begins. Not a gentle rain, a cold, driving rain, nearly horizontal in the wind. Within minutes, men are soaked through. The water is 40 degrees, maybe less. Hypothermia begins, not when you stop moving, but when your core temperature drops below 95. In these conditions, wet clothes, high wind, dropping air temperature, it can happen in an hour. Some hunters decide to head back, but the wind is against them now, and their small boats, 12-footers, 14-footers, designed for calm morning duck hunts, are laboring. The waves on the Mississippi are 3 feet high, white-capped, breaking over the bows, 28 degrees. The rain becomes sleet. This is the moment. This is when the temperature crosses below freezing and everything changes. The sleet stings exposed skin like thrown sand. Visibility drops to a few hundred yards. The world becomes gray. Gray water, gray sky, gray curtains of ice falling sideways in the wind, and the outboard motors begin to fail. Water in the fuel lines, ice forming in carburetors. One by one, engines sputter and die. Men pull frantically on starter ropes, their hands already numb, their fingers clumsy. Some engines restart, some don't. The boats that lose power turn sideways in the waves and begin to drift. The Mississippi is 3 miles wide in some places along this stretch. The islands, which had seemed like shelter, are now obstacles. Boats are pushed into tangles of submerged trees, into log jams, onto sandbars. Men begin to understand that they are in trouble. 18 degrees, full blizzard conditions. The sleet becomes snow. Heavy, wet snow, driven by 60-mile-per-hour winds. Visibility drops to 0. White blindness. The hunters can't see the shore, can't see the islands, can't see each other, even when they're 50 feet apart. The temperature has dropped 42 degrees in 5.5 hours. The men still in their boats are wet to the skin, shivering uncontrollably now. The first stage of hypothermia, the violent shivering that the body uses to generate heat. But the shivering burns energy, and they have no way to replace that energy. No food, no warmth, no shelter. Some men try to row. But the oars are coated in ice. Their hands can no longer grip. The pain in their fingers has progressed past burning into numbness, and numbness is more dangerous because you can't tell when you're losing your grip. Other men try to swim for shore. They jump into the 38-degree water thinking they can make it, thinking anything is better than sitting in the boat waiting. In 38-degree water, you lose consciousness in 15 to 30 minutes. You die in 30 to 90 minutes. Most never make it to shore. 5 degrees. -15 Celsius, full dark, a 50-degree temperature drop in 7 hours. On the river, men are dying. Some in their boats curled in the bottom, covered in snow. Some on islands where they've managed to beach, huddled against trees that provide no warmth, no shelter from the wind. Some in the water, their bodies already going rigid. But the horror is not confined to the river. In Minneapolis, in St. Paul, in every town and city across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, the blizzard arrives like an invading army. It hits during evening rush hour. Thousands of cars are on the roads. Streetcars are running their routes. Children are walking home from school. Within an hour, the cities are paralyzed. Cars stall in drifts that appear in minutes. Snowdrifts 6 feet high, 8 feet high, blocking entire streets. Drivers abandon their vehicles and try to walk, but they can't see. The snow is so thick, driven so hard by the wind, that they can't see buildings 5 feet away. They walk past their own homes and don't recognize them. People become lost in their own neighborhoods. Streetcars freeze to their tracks. The motormen can't open the doors. They're sealed shut with ice. Passengers huddle inside the cold metal cars, burning newspapers in the aisles for warmth, as the temperature outside drops through zero. In rural areas, children are trapped in schoolhouses. Farmers die between their houses and their barns, a distance of 30 feet, but they can't find their way. The whiteout is absolute. It erases the world. This is not the schoolhouse blizzard of 1888, that infamous killer of the prairie. This is 1940. This is the modern age. There are telephones. There are radios. There are weather forecasts. And yet none of it matters when the sky turns white and the temperature drops 50 degrees in 8 hours. When nature decides to remind a warm November morning exactly how fragile its gift was. When the ducks that drew men onto the water were not a blessing, but a warning that no one understood until it was too late. By midnight on November 11th, 1940, Armistice Day, the day of peace, more than 150 people are dead across 5 states. But no one knows that yet. In the darkness and the screaming wind, there is only the immediacy of survival, the desperate arithmetic of cold and time, the realization that the morning's warmth, which felt like a gift, was actually a trap. The perfect morning had been the bait. And all of them, the hunters on the river, the commuters in the cities, the children in the schools, had taken it. Let's slow down now. Let's pull back from the immediacy of dying men and ask the question that haunts every preventable disaster. Why didn't anyone warn them? The answer is both simple and damning. Someone did try to warn them. The warning simply arrived too late or not at all, or in a form that no one could act upon. On the morning of November 11th, 1940, a junior meteorologist named Edward Thielen was working the overnight shift at the Chicago Weather Bureau office, alone. It was a holiday after all, Armistice Day, and the Bureau operated with a skeleton crew. Thielen had been watching the pressure readings collapse throughout the early morning hours. The barometer was falling like a stone dropped down a well. He knew what was coming. At 9:30 a.m., he issued an urgent weather bulletin. Heavy snow and temperatures near zero expected by late afternoon. He sent it by teletype to regional offices, to radio stations, to anyone who might broadcast it. But here's the infrastructure of 1940. Radio stations didn't broadcast weather warnings continuously. There was no emergency alert system, no way to interrupt programming. Most stations wouldn't see Thielen's bulletin until their next scheduled news segment. And by then, hundreds of men were already on the water, beyond the reach of any radio signal their boats might carry. The telephone network existed. Yes. But who would you call? There was no database of duck hunters. No list of men on the river that morning. They had simply left their homes in the dark, driven to the boat launches, and disappeared into the maze of islands and backwaters. They were unreachable. Even if you could have called them, what would you have said that they would have believed? That it would drop 50 degrees in 8 hours, that a morning warm enough for shirt sleeves would become a night cold enough to kill. It would have sounded like madness, like prophesying the impossible. The Weather Bureau had the data. They understood what was happening. But they had no mechanism to translate that knowledge into survival. The gap between knowing and warning, between warning and action, was measured in hours and miles, and the fundamental limitations of 1940s technology. And so men died with accurate weather forecasts, sitting unread on teletype machines in offices that were closed for the holiday. But the river wasn't the only killing ground. 200 miles to the northeast, on Lake Michigan, the blizzard was claiming its largest victims, the Novadoc and the Anna and the Yodi Minch, two steel freighters, each over 400 feet long, were caught in open water when the storm hit. Lake Michigan, which had been calm that morning, transformed into a boiling cauldron of 30-foot waves driven by 80-mile-per-hour winds. The temperature dropped so fast that the spray froze instantly on the ship's superstructures. Ice accumulated at a rate of inches per hour. Tons of ice. Enough ice to make the ships top-heavy, to raise their centers of gravity until they became unstable. The Novadoc radioed its position at 2 p.m. Heavy icing, list increasing. That was the last transmission. The ship capsized sometime between 3:00 and 4 p.m. in the middle of Lake Michigan. 19 men went into the water. The water temperature was 36 degrees. They were wearing life jackets, but life jackets don't protect you from hypothermia. They keep you afloat while you freeze to death. The Anna Minch lasted longer. The crew fought the ice with axes and steam hoses, trying to knock the accumulation off the rails and deck. But you can't fight that kind of cold. By 6 p.m., the ship was carrying so much ice that she rolled over and sank like a stone. 10 more men in the water, 10 more men dying in the dark, while the snow erased any hope of rescue. Coast Guard cutters tried to reach them. But the cutters were icing up too, becoming dangerously unstable. The rescuers had to turn back to save themselves. There was no one else. No helicopters. Those wouldn't be common for another decade. No satellite tracking. No GPS. No way to find men in the water, in zero visibility in a storm that was trying to kill everyone equally. By dawn on November 12th, 29 sailors were dead on Lake Michigan. Their bodies would wash ashore over the next week, frozen solid, still wearing their life jackets. The technology of 1940 was sophisticated enough to predict the storm, but primitive enough to make survival nearly impossible. Weather balloons and barometers could tell you that death was coming, but they couldn't stop it, couldn't slow it, couldn't give you any advantage beyond knowledge. And knowledge without the means to act on it is just another form of helplessness. This was the cruelty of the Armistice Day blizzard. It didn't arrive in some prehistoric age when humans were at nature's mercy. It arrived in the modern era, when we thought we'd gained the upper hand, when we had radios and engines and weather bureaus and the confidence that came from a century of industrial progress. And in 8 hours, all of that modernity meant nothing. The engines froze. The radios couldn't reach anyone. The weather bureaus issued warnings that no one received. We were as vulnerable as we'd ever been. We'd just forgotten it during that warm November morning. November 12th, 1940. Dawn. The wind has finally stopped. The snow has stopped. The sky is clear and brutally blue, the kind of achingly beautiful morning that arrives after great storms, like an insult to the dead. The temperature is 12 degrees below zero, -24 Celsius. Along the Mississippi, rescue parties are forming. Men with ropes tied around their waists, venturing out onto the ice that has formed overnight, ice thick enough to walk on, but not thick enough to trust. They're looking for the boats, for the bodies. They find them in the postures of the freezing, curled tight, hands tucked under armpits. Some men frozen sitting upright, still gripping their oars. Others face down in the bottom of their boats, buried under 6 inches of snow. One hunter is found frozen to a tree on an island, his arms locked around the trunk in a final embrace, as if the tree might provide the warmth his body could no longer generate. In Winona, Minnesota, they bring 27 bodies to the National Guard Armory. They lay them out in rows on the floor because there's nowhere else to put them. The undertakers are overwhelmed. Some bodies are so frozen they can't be moved into coffins. They have to wait for them to thaw. The cities are silent under their blankets of snow. Drifts 15 feet high block entire streets. Thousands of cars are buried, just shapes under white mounds, like gravestones. It will take a week to dig them all out. Some won't be found until the spring thaw. The streetcars that froze on their tracks sit empty now, their windows opaque with frost. Inside, you can still see the charred newspapers that passengers burned for warmth before they abandoned the cars and tried to walk home. 49 people died in Minnesota alone, 27 in Wisconsin, 18 in Michigan. The death toll climbs as more bodies are discovered. A farmer found frozen between his house and barn. A businessman found dead in his car 3 blocks from his office. Children who left school and never made it home. 149 confirmed dead. Perhaps more. Some bodies won't be found until spring when the snow melts and the river gives them back. But here's what happened next, and why this particular disaster matters beyond its body count. The Armistice Day blizzard broke something fundamental in American meteorology. It shattered the assumption that forecasting was enough. That if you predicted the weather, you'd fulfilled your obligation. The Weather Bureau had predicted this storm. Edward Thielen had known it was coming, but that knowledge had died in the gap between forecast and warning, between warning and action. Within months, the Weather Bureau began a complete overhaul. 24-hour staffing became mandatory. New teletype networks were installed connecting weather offices directly to radio stations with protocols for immediate broadcast interruption. The foundation was laid for what would eventually become the National Weather Service's emergency alert system. The concept of a weather watch versus a weather warning was born from this storm. The idea that prediction wasn't enough. You needed a systematic way to translate meteorological data into immediate, actionable public safety information. By 1952, the Weather Bureau had established the first severe weather warning system. By 1970, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, was created. Today, your phone buzzes with warnings before you even see the storm approaching. Weather satellites track systems from space. Doppler radar sees inside clouds. The gap between knowing and warning has been compressed from hours to seconds. All of that infrastructure, the satellites, the Doppler arrays, the emergency broadcast system, the weather apps that tell you it's going to rain before you leave the house, can trace its genealogy back to November 11th, 1940, and the men who died because a warm morning lied to them about what the afternoon would bring. But technology, no matter how sophisticated, can't change the fundamental equation. Nature doesn't negotiate. Cold doesn't care about your preparation or your forecasts or your confidence in human progress. A 50-degree temperature drop in 8 hours is still lethal in 2026. The wind can still turn a lake into a graveyard. Snow can still erase a landscape so completely that you die within sight of your own front door. The Armistice Day blizzard wasn't a failure of knowledge. It was a revelation of limitation. We want to believe that enough data, enough technology, enough warning can make us safe. That if we just measure precisely enough, predict accurately enough, we can stay ahead of the chaos. But there are thresholds beyond which measurement doesn't matter. Moments when the universe reminds us that consciousness and sophistication and the entire weight of human civilization are no match for the simple, ancient physics of heat transfer. The relentless movement of energy from warm to cold, from life to stillness. The men who died on the Mississippi that day weren't fools. They weren't reckless. They were hunters doing what hunters had done for generations on a morning that promised perfection. They trusted in the reasonable assumption that November couldn't turn into February in the span of a single afternoon. They were wrong, and the wrongness killed them. What remains 85 years later is not just a historical curiosity about a forgotten storm. What remains is the lesson that comfort is always temporary, that warmth is always borrowed, that every mild morning carries within it the potential for evening that will take everything from you. The ducks knew. The ducks, with their barometric sensitivity and evolutionary wisdom, knew to run. They filled the sky in their thousands trying to outrace what was coming, and we saw them and thought they were a gift. We forgot that sometimes abundance is a warning, that sometimes nature offers you exactly what you want right before it takes everything you have. The bodies pulled from the ice that cold November morning were recovered, mourned, and buried. The boats were salvaged, the drifts melted. Life returned to normal, the way it always does, because humans are remarkably good at forgetting how close we always are to the edge. But the river remembers. The lake remembers. And on certain November mornings, when the temperature is unseasonably warm and the sky is full of migrating birds, the descendants of those hunters, if they're paying attention, if they've heard the stories, might look up and feel the faintest whisper of unease. Because they know what we all eventually learn, that the most dangerous weather doesn't announce itself with thunder and darkness. The most dangerous weather arrives on a beautiful morning, wearing the mask of a gift, inviting you to lower your guard just long enough for the sky to change its mind. And when the sky changes its mind, you don't get a vote. You don't get a second chance. You get the temperature you're given and the time you have left, and the only question that matters is whether you'll make it home before the warm morning you trusted becomes the frozen night that kills you.